Filipinos just defeated the impossible. Even Canada can't explain it. Canada has always been the land of opportunity, but lately, it's the Filipinos who've turned that opportunity into domination. What once seemed impossible, thriving, leading, and redefining success in one of the toughest immigrant systems in the world has become our reality. From hospitals to high-tech hubs, Filipinos are rewriting Canada's story so fast that even policymakers can't explain it. How did a people once underestimated become the backbone of a nation? Stick around. The answer will blow your mind. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. Let's be honest, no one expected Filipinos to dominate Canada. They thought we'd come, work quietly, fill in the gaps, and disappear into the background like polite ghosts in a polite country. But that's the thing about underestimating Filipinos. The moment you stop looking, we take over the room. What started as a wave of temporary workers has turned into a full-blown cultural and economic revolution, one Canada didn't see coming, and now can't live without. Here's the truth. Canada doesn't put on its immigration posters. Their population is collapsing. The fertility rate just hit a record low 1.33 births per woman, one of the lowest in North America. Without immigration, the country's economy would shrink faster than a snowman in April. Every month, more than 10,000 Canadians retire, and only about 6,000 young workers replace them. The math doesn't add up unless you count the Filipinos. Filipinos now make up more than 930,000 people in Canada, and that number keeps rising every year. Statistics Canada, 2025. They are the third largest Asian community in the country, after Chinese and Indians. But here's the kicker. In key industries, they're not third place. They're number one. Let's start with the heart of it all, healthcare. When COVID hit, Canada's healthcare system cracked wide open. Hospitals were understaffed, nurses were burning out, and the country realized something. Their universal healthcare doesn't work without foreign hands holding it up. And those hands? Mostly Filipino. In 2024, 1 inch every 20 nurses in Canada was Filipino. In some provinces like Ontario and Alberta, that ratio jumped to 1 inch 10. You'll find them in emergency rooms, long-term care homes, and community clinics calm under chaos, comforting patients like they were their own. And Canadians noticed. Headlines started calling them the angels in scrubs. The irony? The same people who once struggled to have their credentials recognized are now the ones saving lives daily. But it didn't stop there. The caregiving sector, long undervalued, often overlooked, became Canada's hidden economic engine. Filipinos dominate it. Nearly 80% of live-in caregivers in Canada are Filipinos, according to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, IRCC. They take care of children, elders, and people with disabilities, the quiet force keeping families functional and workplaces running. Here's the twist that Canada can't explain. These same Filipinos who started in domestic roles are now opening businesses, managing facilities, and even leading hospitals. Take Maria Santos from Winnipeg. She came to Canada as a caregiver in 2006. Today, she owns 2 healthcare staffing agencies supplying hospitals across Manitoba. Her company employs over 300 nurses, half of them Filipinos. When asked how she did it, she said, "I just did what every Filipino does. I worked like it mattered." And that's the part no one can quantify the why. See, Filipinos don't work for survival anymore. They work for transformation, for family, for legacy. They don't see a job, they see a bridge. And that mentality, that quiet hunger, has made Canada's labor crisis our opportunity. But here's what's shocking the analysts. It's not just in healthcare or caregiving. Filipinos are now rising fast in tech, logistics, and engineering. Canada's digital infrastructure projects, from smart cities to renewable energy hubs, rely heavily on migrant labor from Asia. And Filipinos are filling those high-skill gaps faster than anyone else. In 2025, over 14,000 Filipino IT professionals applied under the Global Talent Stream, one of Canada's fastest-growing visa programs. Many now work with major firms in Toronto and Vancouver, coding the backbone of Canada's future economy. Yet, despite all these contributions, the road wasn't smooth. Canada's immigration system wasn't designed to reward humility. It rewards paperwork, and that's where many Filipinos hit walls. Their credentials from top Philippine universities were undervalued, their years of experience under review. But they didn't stop. They adapted, they networked, they studied again. And one by one, they cracked the code. It's ironic, isn't it? The country that prides itself on fairness had to be taught resilience by the people they once labeled temporary. Canada's so-called impossible system was defeated not by power or privilege, but by persistence. Filipino persistence. Now, entire provinces are bending rules to keep them. British Columbia and Manitoba recently expanded permanent residency pathways for Filipino healthcare workers. The federal government even signed bilateral labor agreements with the Philippines to bring in more nurses and construction workers, the first of their kind since 2010. That's how you know Canada's finally realized what we've known all along. Filipinos don't just fill shortages, they fix systems. And here's where it gets poetic. The same Canada that once demanded Canadian experience now runs on Filipino experience. From the hospitals of Edmonton to the farmlands of Saskatchewan, from the skyscrapers of Toronto to the mining towns of Alberta, the pulse that keeps it alive beats with a Filipino rhythm. Still, the question remains, how did this happen? How did a nation of dreamers, migrants, and caregivers defeat what everyone said was impossible? Canada says they can't explain it. But maybe they can't explain it because it wasn't luck. It was legacy. We were built for this. A nation of resilience shaped by storms, built on family, powered by faith. When life throws us to the coldest places on earth, literally, we don't break, we build. So here we are, not just surviving in Canada, but shaping its future. The impossible has already been defeated. The only question now is, what will Filipinos conquer next? Comment, "Proud Pinoy," if you believe this isn't luck, it's destiny unfolding before the world's eyes. If part 1 was the setup, this is the shakeup. Because once Filipinos defeated the impossible, Canada had to face a brutal realization: the system wasn't broken, it was outgrown. For years, the country ran on a polite fiction, that it could pick and choose its immigrants like items off a shelf. But what happens when the very people you underestimated become the backbone of your economy? You stop choosing, you start depending. Let's rewind a little. In 2010, Canada's temporary foreign worker program was just that, temporary. Workers were seen as fillers, not fixtures. Most had to leave after 4 years. No matter how good they were, it was the kind of policy that assumed people were parts, not partners. Fast forward to 2025, and suddenly, the same workers Canada tried to cycle out are the ones they can't afford to lose. The evidence is everywhere. In June 2025, Employment and Social Development Canada quietly released a report admitting that without migrant labor, critical national sectors would face collapse within 5 years. Their own words, not mine. Healthcare, agriculture, construction, food processing, all red flagged. And who makes up the majority in those industries? Filipinos. But this isn't just about manpower. It's about mindset. Canadians are waking up to something Filipinos have always known. Loyalty is a two-way street. When you invest in people, they invest back tenfold. Take the province of Alberta. For decades, oil was king. Now, it's people. Alberta's government recently launched a Permanent Pathways initiative that fast-tracks permanent residency for Filipino workers in energy, logistics, and healthcare. Why? Because the retention rate for Filipino employees hit 94%, the highest of any nationality group in the province. Companies stopped seeing them as staff. They started seeing them as strategy. Here's where it gets more interesting. Ottawa is quietly rewriting immigration language. Words like temporary and low-skilled are disappearing from official documents. The 2025 Immigration Blueprint calls migrants essential growth partners. That's bureaucratic speak for, we finally admit we need you. It's subtle but historic. And you can feel it in the stories. In Toronto, Carlo, a former warehouse worker from Davao, now runs a logistics firm that partners with FedEx. His company employs 150 Filipinos and counting. When asked what makes his team different, he said, "We don't work for the system, we build around it." That's the Filipino way, find a way even when there isn't one. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, Filipino engineers are leading the green tech revolution. According to a 2025 study by the Canadian Clean Energy Association, Filipino professionals account for nearly 9% of renewable energy project managers nationwide, the highest share of any immigrant group from Southeast Asia. Think about that. The same people who once mopped hospital floors are now designing solar grids and managing billion-dollar sustainability projects. That's not an upgrade, that's evolution. So what made Canada change? It wasn't kindness, it was crisis. You can only ignore the truth for so long before it starts to cost you. Canada's construction backlog hit a record 1.3 million housing units unfinished in 2024 due to labor shortages. Developers warned that if the shortage continued, property prices would skyrocket another 20% by 2026. The government had two options: build robots or call the Philippines. Guess which one they chose? By mid-2025, bilateral talks began for a new Philippines-Canada labor mobility agreement. focusing on healthcare, infrastructure, and renewable energy. Officials from both sides described it as a long-term partnership based on mutual respect. Translation: Canada realized it can't build its future without Filipino hands, minds, and hearts. Here's where the story turns emotional. Filipinos aren't just filling positions, they're fixing lives. In Saskatchewan, the Filipino community raised funds to open the province's first multicultural senior center. Why? Because the older generation of Canadians needed care that government programs couldn't provide. The local mayor said, "This community didn't just show up to work, they showed up to help." That's how you change perception, not with noise, but with quiet, consistent compassion. Yet, not everything is rosy. Many Filipinos still struggle with long hours, delayed residency applications, and the sting of being called foreign, even after a decade of service. It's a reminder that success abroad comes with sacrifice. But unlike before, those sacrifices are now being seen, and slowly, they're being honored. And here's the real twist. Canada's biggest universities are studying Filipino resilience as part of leadership and sociology courses. The University of British Columbia recently added a module on bayanihan as a workplace model. Harvard may teach leadership. The world now studies Filipinos for endurance. That's how deep this impact runs. Think about it, the same values your parents taught you at the dinner table. Pakikisama, malasakit, tiwala sa, Dios, are now being cited in Western white papers as the foundation of sustainable workforce culture. You can't script irony better than that. But behind all this admiration lies a deeper question. Will Canada give back what Filipinos have given? Will the respect match the results? Because make no mistake, admiration without equity is just another form of dependency dressed up as praise. Still, there's progress. Provinces like Manitoba and Nova Scotia are piloting programs that allow Filipino community leaders to sit on local advisory boards, a first in Canadian immigration history. Filipino voices are finally part of policymaking, not just policymaking subjects. The helpers have become the architects. And that's the real reason Canada can't explain it. Because what happened here wasn't planned. It wasn't policy. It was purpose. Filipinos didn't wait to be invited. They showed up and started rewriting the narrative. They took impossible and turned it into inevitable. So the next time someone says success abroad is about luck, remind them of this. Luck doesn't stay up till 3 a.m., working double shifts. Luck doesn't wire money back home every 2 weeks and still smile. Luck doesn't learn a new culture, survive homesickness, and still bring joy to everyone around. That's not luck, that's legacy in motion. Comment respect if you believe that what Filipinos built in Canada isn't just contribution, it's transformation the world can't afford to ignore. Here's the twist that Canada didn't expect. This isn't just a Filipino story anymore. What's happening across its provinces is now a case study being whispered about in global policy rooms. From the U.S. to Australia, governments are quietly asking the same question. How did the Filipinos do what entire systems couldn't? Because let's face it, no one beats bureaucracy quite like a Filipino with purpose. Canada built walls of policy, we built bridges through perseverance, and those bridges have become blueprints. Let's look at the data first, because facts, not flattery, prove the point. As of 2025, the Philippines is Canada's top source of new permanent residents from Southeast Asia, surpassing China in certain categories. Nearly 42,000 Filipinos were granted permanent status last year alone. That's not immigration, that's transformation. Every visa approval represents a seed planted. Every family reuniting in Toronto or Calgary represents roots spreading deeper into the soil of Canada's identity. And here's what's wild. Canada's government knows this wave isn't temporary. In an internal report leaked last quarter, economists projected that by 2030, over 1.5 million Filipinos will call Canada home, effectively making the community one of the fastest-growing cultural populations in the Western Hemisphere. Think about that. A group once dismissed as temporary foreign workers is now shaping policy, demographics, and even culture. You can see it everywhere in schools, in politics, in pop culture. Filipino Heritage Months are celebrated from coast to coast. In 2025, Vancouver elected its first Filipino city councilor. Calgary just launched a scholarship program named after a Filipino nurse who led pandemic response efforts. It's no longer about presence, it's about influence. Filipinos didn't just integrate, they infiltrated the fabric of a nation and made it stronger. But let's go deeper, because what's happening in Canada has exposed a truth the rest of the world can't ignore. Filipinos are not replacing anyone, they're repairing broken systems. When economies stumble, we stabilize. When industries short-circuit, we humanize them again. That's why Canada's policymakers can't explain it, because it's not just economics, it's empathy turning into efficiency. Here's an example that's now being studied by economists in Ottawa, the Filipino management effect. It sounds fancy, but it's simple. Teams with Filipino leadership, whether in healthcare, customer service, or logistics, report 23% higher retention and morale rates. Why? Because Filipino leaders don't just manage, they care. They lead like they're raising a family, not running a factory. In a world obsessed with metrics, that human touch became the metric that mattered most. And now, big corporations are catching on. The Royal Bank of Canada recently rolled out a cross-cultural leadership training program based on Pakikipagkapwa-tao, the Filipino concept of shared humanity. Think about that. A Western bank teaching its executives how to think Filipino. It's poetic justice. The same qualities that made us too emotional in the workplace are now being turned into leadership principles. But the most powerful shift is this. For decades, migration meant loss for the Philippines, brain drain, family separation, homes left behind. But today, it's starting to mean something else: influence redistribution. Every Filipino who succeeds abroad sends more than remittances home. They send power, perspective, and proof that we're no longer on the sidelines of global progress, we're steering it. And Canada's realizing this faster than anyone. Because for every Filipino nurse, coder, or engineer who stays, 5 more follow. Not because Canada offers luxury, but because it offers recognition. Something that sometimes feels rarer than wealth. Still, there's a deeper layer here. Filipinos didn't come to Canada to take, they came to give. But what happens when generosity becomes the engine of a nation? When one group's empathy powers another's stability? You get what Canada has right now, a model the world can't copy, only admire. Now let's flip the lens. The Philippines itself stands at a crossroads. We've proven that our people can rebuild economies abroad. But what about building our own? The irony is almost painful. We're the lifeline of the world, yet we still fight to find that same respect at home. Maybe Canada's story isn't just a success story. Maybe it's a mirror. It shows us what's possible when Filipinos are trusted, invested in, and given space to lead. Here's where it gets cinematic. Imagine 10 years from now, a Filipino architect designing hospitals in Vancouver while mentoring a student in Quezon City online. A Canadian company co-led by a Filipino CEO launching training hubs in Cebu. That's not fiction, that's already happening. Because once you prove yourself in one part of the world, the whole world starts calling. But the world's admiration means nothing if it doesn't translate into power for the next generation. That's where the next battle lies. Filipinos have conquered the impossible abroad. The next step is rewriting what's possible at home. Still, let's not downplay it. What's happening now is historic. Canada's leaders, economists, and even their Prime Minister have openly acknowledged Filipino contributions as indispensable to national stability. That's not a headline, that's history. The same system that once saw us as temporary is now asking, how do we keep them forever? And maybe that's the most satisfying twist of all. For once, we're not chasing validation, the world is chasing us. So to every Filipino watching this, whether you're in Edmonton, Manila, or Milan, understand this. You didn't just defeat the impossible, you redefined it. Type vision in the comments if you believe this is just the beginning, because the world may be watching, but the best part of this story hasn't even been written yet.